you do the open door sessions and you're comfortable with that, and the board members could come in and just listen like we did on the referendum, not speak. You can even keep us mute. It's just really helpful to hear the questions and the responses. It helps us to be better board members, I think. Just an idea. If you're not comfortable, that's fine.
Yeah, and well, actually, we've completed those. The surveys are due this weekend. But what I will tell you is, and I think it's really important that you are aware of the questions that were asked. At the bottom of the first page, where it states, instructional model FAQ, that is a hyperlink to a very lengthy document that Katie put together. Many of those questions directly from those virtual open doors, from our parents. So please take some time, click on that, and take a look at that. It's also, of course, linked from, at our website as well. So
can I just ask too, when you mentioned it was well attended, you have like a rough idea of numbers?
Sure. Yeah, I think the first one we had roughly 20 that joined us. Last night's was we're in the 30s, and then we actually held a special one on the 9th specifically for Spanish-speaking families. That one was not well attended, but Jade Fee, our bilingual specialist, has an opportunity to reach out, individually as well to a number of families and provide, support and answer questions. So, yeah, it was really good. Okay. And then likewise, as we move forward with the, to match up teaching assignments with our family selections, again, you'll see the progress on the timeline. And so every teacher has an opportunity to submit a preference form. And of course, there'll be individual conversations as well with principals. And starting next week, we'll start matching up, putting together those class lists and start, putting together the staffing plan. And the next steps, those are the same two items I had at the last time. We are continuing to move forward. The things as far as the physical spaces, what the principals and teachers are doing right now, working on those individual classroom or the hallways, having tape down, for and arrows and where students can walk and so on, all those sorts of things. And so that's in progress and, will be completed soon, well in advance before having students in the building. But it's just an ongoing and piece. And likewise with all the protocols, we essentially have them. They're still in draft form only because we've been able to make modifications from our initial protocols based on things that we've learned from other school districts that have already experienced some of the things. So that will be, again, completed and shared out well in advance before in December. So we'll make sure the board sees those final documentation as well. Like I said, in advance of students coming into the buildings. And likewise, our parents will see those. So when I stop there, any other questions or comments about just that timeline and what we're working on right now with regard to student planning and teacher planning?
Eric?
Yep, there I am. Hello.
All right, there you go.
No, Dan, I no, just one question about we talked a little bit at the last board meeting. I know I spoke with you just about maybe some way getting, or at least letting the board hear what some of the teacher input would be regarding the safety procedures and stuff like that. Was that where are you at with that?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that it is an ongoing and one of the so as our principals are having conversations, with teachers, those are a number of questions that are coming up. So some of them we absolutely have answers and we're able to share out, and others are okay. We need to refine that and talk through a little bit. So I think when I mentioned us putting together those written protocols, those are the things that we'll be able to share out, and we'll share those as draft forms with staff as well before as a final piece. You'll see it as well as a board in draft form to make sure that we're not missing anything. So I would say that's an ongoing process. To answer your question specifically about specific questions that teachers have, I think that would be a great thing where perhaps next time we have the principals can talk a little bit about the detail and the interactions that they're having, with staff. Can probably answer better than I.
Yeah, so I appreciate the feedback from the principals, but I would really like to have feedback from the teachers directly. I think it's, I know the principals do a great job, but I think it's with something like this, with the, serious concerns with the pandemic, I would feel more comfortable having direct feedback from the teachers and how they feel. And I just want to hear what they have to say, really, and maybe ask a couple clarifying questions, like, if there's 4K 2 teachers that are nervous, about going into work, I want to know, well, why are you nervous? And then 2, is there something that we're not doing as a district that we can be doing, whether that's providing some PPE or training or whatever it is. I'd like to get that direct feedback, if possible, from the teachers rather than the administrators.
So yeah, I appreciate that, and you're right. We did talk about that a little bit. So we will have to kind of figure out what would be the best form in order to have that kind of feedback. Obviously, we can share out written things, but actually, so we'll have to follow up on the best way to approach that.
Okay. Yeah, I know there might be logistically a little bit tricky with, but I'm hoping that we can figure out a way to do it somehow.
Yeah, I was thinking even, that one listening session we had, Dan, that you did was very well attended. And if anything, we could have something like that where there would be a presentation of what the, what the protocols would be and what things were in place, if they don't already know that through staff meetings. And and if they do, that might be even better, because then they could just have an hour to ask questions and talk.
Yeah.
But that seemed like we had, I don't know, 40 or 50. It seemed like there were a lot of teachers on that.
We actually had 100, because at that point our Zoom account was limited to 100, and unfortunately we hit the maximum.
Not everybody could get on there. That's right.
We've since expanded.
Yeah.
That's a good suggestion. And Eric, I think does that kind of sound like?
Yeah, that would be perfect.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll definitely get that scheduled.
Well, and I agree. I thought that was wonderful to be able to listen. I understand why you may not want board interaction in a meeting, an administrative meeting with teachers. As I recall, we were closed off, but we could listen to all the responses and how you responded. And then we could come back to you with the list of questions that we still had as a board. So, and validation of how the schools are being cleaned and those kind of things.
Yeah, no, great idea. So we'll be glad to, and that obviously that's something I want to, yes, we'll make it work and make it available for board members to, join in. Okay, good. Any other comments or questions about the planning process for 4K2? Okay. Then at the very bottom, athletics activities update. I did put a link in there where the bullet point says winter sports registration. That's actually gives you a link to all the communication that has gone out to parents from the high school, specifically to activities and sports. And so where we're at this point is that we are having students register, and we are working on having that opportunity under the current guidance that we can have cohorts of 10 or under in the schools. So Jeff Schreiner has met with our school nurses and facilities folks to walk through and look at all the protocols that need to be in place about how we would track students and so on. And then we're working individually with each coach. Every sport's a little bit different, and to give that flexibility about providing those opportunities. And so that's moving forward. And then as those things get scheduled, I'll make sure I share out with the board. So nothing's been approved at this point. As they work with the coaches, ultimately those written plans will come forward, for a number of people for review, but ultimately for myself. And I said, we're ready to go. I'll make sure I share that out with you. And then related to that, there is an attachment on board docs for our activities, our non-athletic activities, just a kind of a bullet point checklist so you can see what each of those activities are doing with regard to how they're connecting with students. So it's not a lot of detail, but to give you an idea that yes, our advisors are connecting with students in each of those, and they're up and running the best they can in our current environment. Okay, any questions on athletics or activities?
I just wonder if anything was happening at the middle school in a similar vein.
Yep, great question. So we have shared out with our middle school team as well about what the high school is doing, and they are as well working on kind of evaluating what those opportunities might look like. It might look a little differently for middle school students, where it might be more of an instead of sports specific, because they have so few sports, that more intramural type things, or likewise with the activities. So they're not quite as far along, but they are as well in looking at that. And I expect here before the winter break as well to have kind of a proposal from them as well.
Dan, would it be possible to maybe have at the next board meeting, Jeff kind of give us an update of where everything is with athletics? And I'd be curious to know like how many kids are participating and what it started, what that looks like and what the safety precautions are too.
I would support that. Thank you, Eric.
Well, and if Jeff comes, maybe is Dan Zweifel still? Is he just
Actually, no, he's no longer.
I thought he wasn't. I forget who.
Yeah, so actually, Nate Verhage, our
Okay, right,
the students is the athletic director for.
I kind of like to hear where they are too.
Yeah,
sure.
Great, thanks. And if there are any other middle school activities too, because I appreciated seeing some of the high school other activities going on, and that maybe happening at the middle school too. Okay, thanks.
So, okay, good. Okay, and then the other part of the written report, I just kind of updated some of the data, weekly data from public health. I scaled this way back. It's all on their website. But one of the things I will mention is, you're well aware that last night, Governor Evers came out with his order, which were mostly, recommendations, or entirely recommendations. But there's a lot of question, a lot of discussion today about, well, what does that mean for schools? Does that have any impact on what we're doing in schools? And the answer is no. We've, public health guidance and requirements have always been at least, if not more, stringent, I'll say, than the state. And so that does not compromise anything that we already have in place in Dane County, and as well as where we are able to have students and staff in the building as well. It does not contradict, that at all. So it really doesn't have impact on how we operate day to day. But it was really meant more of us as a statewide reminder, I think, outside of the workplace for us. So.
Dan, is there any information or data regarding, the effects of students not being in school on mental health? Have you seen any information or data regarding those types of?
I haven't seen studies. I think partly because of its, such a short time period. Certainly, a lot of comment and anecdotal and from pediatricians, noting, things that they've seen with. Children. That is a conversation that we're, having a little bit more formally. I think I've mentioned several times how we, meet regularly with our public health officials, and we are, as a Dane County group, starting to have those conversations as well about, because we obviously have great resources right here in Dane County. So particularly partnering with some of the folks at UW and the pediatrics, that we have had contacts and talked about having those collective discussions as well, instead of we all anecdotally, of course, have information that we see with some of our students, but to really have those, I think. So I think the short answer is there's been some, and definitely be more to come on that.
Okay.
So could I just, and Eric, I don't want to interrupt you, so if I do, just have me wait. But Dan, there's some data out there, and maybe we could just get that. I think Krista, did make some indications, so maybe we, as a board, we could ask her to report out in relation to the bridges and if there's been any changes. I know Journey, as a provider of mental health services, has had a spike increase in services. I know that several individuals that I have reporting from in terms of psychology, particularly with children, the numbers have increased. So I really think that Dane County probably has some of those numbers. And again, call up Katie Schmidt, who's the Director of Medical Services at Child Psych. They added 20 beds. And once again, they're seeing increases in the services that are being provided. So I'm pretty sure that Dane County has those numbers because I have them. So it might be helpful when you have time to get to maybe have Krista or Sean give us some of that information, because I think it is a factor.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. I agree.
And thank you. And I appreciate the clarification. And I guess I'm not sure what you said, Eric. In my mind, I was thinking studies, like more long-term versus data from actual, cases and so on, as Susan described. So
yeah, well, I think both would be helpful, actually, Dan, really, to have as much as info as we can, ideally. But
so the majority of, Eric, to answer your question, the majority of like actual academic study is on college students right now, and there is an uptick, about 25%. There's not as much like actual scientific data on students, but kind of as Susan noted, anecdotally, when you talk about like your child serving and child psychology organizations, most of them are reporting an uptick. And so you can kind of follow that, like if it's moving up for college students, it stands to reason that it'll probably be moving up at about the same pace for younger students as well. But most of the actual academic study has been at the college level for obvious reasons. They're an easier population to study.
thanks.
Well, again, Katie Schmidt has that information for basically younger children, because it's the child and adolescent psychiatric facility.
Yeah, but we want to be mindful of not making extrapolations on mental health, like
Right.
disorder versus acute mental health, issues as a result of circumstances. So that's the only thing to be cautious of when you're pulling like really localized data.
But you can look at dates and the number of people being serviced by the dates, and you're right, there may not be a correlation, but if there are in fact increases during that time, it makes it more difficult to meet the needs if they arise.
That's correct.
Well, or even calls within our own district to Krista, your team, and that'd be worth knowing too. Have we seen an uptick in that, and where does that stand? I mean, that's very localized, but that's very relevant. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, and then the second thing I just wanted to mention briefly tonight is calendar planning for next school year. And normally this is about the time that we would be putting that together and going through our committee. And we've, the last couple of years, have brought a recommendation to the board in December. And so if we were to develop a kind of a status quo type calendar, we'll be ready to do that again in December as scheduled. But we are starting to have some conversations as well, given this is the year of change and adaptation, that we're looking at, particularly as a result of having our Wednesday collaboration time with teachers. One of the things that has kind of been discussed for the last few years is the idea about our in-service days and how effective are those full day in-service days spread out through the year versus, for instance, like a weekly early release type thing. So the fact that we now have a little bit of a taste of that weekly collaboration, we are going to spend some time and examine that. So I don't think it's at this point ready to say whether or not that would be part of a proposal, other than we want to take a little bit of time now while it's fresh to have that discussion. If we believe that is something that we might want to consider incorporating for next year, I'll certainly report out of that the next meeting. And if that's the case for kind of a bigger change like that, it would be possible that we might not have a final approval for a calendar until January, because obviously we want to make sure we flesh that out and not rush to something like that. But so I just wanted to give you a heads up that those are the discussions that we're having, and that's been very much something that we've heard feedback from teachers for some time with, and so we thought now would be the time to at least have a in-depth conversation about that. So
And is there some discussion of that at building levels so that teachers are discussing that with principals too, or how are those discussions occurring, I guess?
Yeah, so at this point, it's only been informal. Last year, we actually, when we had our calendar committee, we had some discussion at that point, and we determined that was way too big of issue to just, with a small committee, make that decision and bring it forward. So without question, that would be a district-wide discussion, that we need to involve a lot of people with.
Okay.
So, and I would like to add that there has been an article about an increase in suicide rates, which they are now trying to deem whether or not they're correlations with the COVID-19 virus. They're seeing a correlation, but right now it's an extrapolation. But again, there is data on this.
But you're talking about specifically related to people who've had the virus. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's, well, again, I can give you guys the
Some kind
link.
of long-term effects of that type of thing on that.
Yeah, I can give you the link to that.
That's okay. We were on to
The anecdotal information is that at Unity Point Health Matters Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Hospital, demand for treatment increased during the summer with admissions in July 25% higher than normal. Now, that one is not specifically linked to the COVID, but again, I think we have to be cognizant of that fact as we look at the services that we're offering to the students in the schools.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there's not a doubt that we're going to see an increase in mental health issues related to not necessarily COVID directly, but certainly the impacts of COVID, right? Extended stay at home, extended being disconnected, particularly for families and children that are already vulnerable for a variety of reasons. And so I think that part is probably accurate. The question is kind of how much and then what to do.
Right.
And so I think, Susan Fox, your point around what does our specific data look like, right? Around students
And
who are
that's what I was
accessing student
referring to
services and
right,
supports.
Yeah, is more that is what I was talking about. But
Exactly.
I read something yesterday too about they're thinking COVID itself, if you have it, has long-term of mental health issues that last a long time. So they're starting to find that. Anyway, back to the calendar issue again. When you have that broader discussion involving teachers and principals, if we're talking early release, we probably also want to be communicating with parents, and because I know that, years ago, the district did a late start on, I think it was Mondays or something, and people just hated it. I mean, they weren't in favor of it when we did it, and I was still teaching then, I wasn't on the board, and we all thought it was a bad idea too, and it lasted for a year and we had to drop it because there was it was also harder, as you can imagine, in the morning when you've got your whole workday ahead of you to get teachers to feel like they could engage in something. So I think if anything, the early release is better because then you've completed your day's work. I mean, up to the point until you have all the homework you have to do. But you can switch gears and focus on other things easier than when you have the whole day in front of you. So that does make sense to me, but just so we get some parent input as well.
Absolutely. That is, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's really important. And also I agree with you I think this has been around long enough that there's pretty much, I would concur if we do anything late starts are not a good thing. It's difficult.
Well, kids are home by themselves. That means if parents have to go to work, it was really problematic. Yeah, for a lot of reasons.
I'll just say, and this is just my opinion, not necessarily the opinion of our teachers or other administrators, but I did have an opportunity to work in 2 different districts that had early releases. And I think one of the things, they were really popular, you go back 15, 20 years ago, and that's when we had the 180-day student requirement, plus the hours. It was just so hard to find enough time for in-service days. And so that was an opportunity to try to find some, collaboration time for your staff. Now that we have a little bit more flexibility and we don't have to have 180 student contact days, it is easier to get more in-service days. But I think now the question is really that the most effective way to provide PD, those full days, versus breaking it up into, smaller chunks. So I think that's the conversation that we need to have. And whether or not if we want to go that way, we could pull it together, for next year. Because I agree that you can't just implement it. You have to involve teachers, parents, but if there's no reason we couldn't do that within 2 months as well, so one way or another, next month, we'll either have an update on the planning process, or we'll say, you know what, we're not ready to do that, and we'll have a status quo calendar for you for another year. So.
Andrew, I have a question.
Let's go ahead, Liz.
Just curious, Dan, kind of in the thinking about post-COVID world and planning for next year, has there been any discussion at all about potentially keeping a virtual option, particularly for students who may be finding success there?
Absolutely. I guess I wouldn't say the discussions are far enough along to say, here's what it would look like, other than there is definitely some things that we need to consider, as you mentioned. So I think informally, without question, not so much formally yet.
All right. Any more questions? Okay. Is that it, Dan?
That's all I have. Yep.
Oh, Peter.
I guess I would say that, yes, it's a good opportunity to look at how we do things because of the disruption. And then when we come back, if there's things that we'd like to do differently, it's a good time to think about them and try and work them in. So kudos for thinking about that. And so that means, but don't start with the status quo, right? That means that the status quo might not be the right place to start. And I hope that you're, especially this year, working extra hard to get teacher input on the calendar.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks.
Thank
Peter.
you.
All right. Moving on to board reports. Personnel Committee, Susan Fox.
Okay. The Personnel Committee met this week on Monday, November 9, in closed session for the purpose of bargaining with the MGEA for the 2020-21 base wages for the educational assistants. And I'm happy to report that we have a tentative agreement that will hopefully, the process is that it gets ratified by the MGEA first and then comes to the board. So hopefully we'll come to the board for possible approval in December. If we have some other special meeting prior to that, maybe earlier. And that'll wrap up our last employee group for wages for this year.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Susan. Next is the Teaching Learning Equity Committee. Eric.
So the Teacher Learning Equity Committee met, and we had a really informative meeting because we were able to coordinate with the Parent Equity Council and hear the work that they are doing, which is incredibly important and in some ways coincides with some of the work that we're doing. So I'm looking forward to maybe coordinating with them again in the future. And the work they're doing is so important, and they have a lot less restrictions than a board committee too, which so it was really, really informative to hear the feedback from some of the things, especially the direct student response and interaction that they reported on was very valuable information for us. So the next Teaching Learning Equity Committee is on the 17th at 4:30 p.m.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. Policy Committee, Susan Manning.
Okay, the Policy Committee met on October 20th. Tuesday, we reviewed policy 0167.3, public participation at board meetings, and we brought that material to the board.
All right.
And we will be meeting, I'm sorry, I don't have that date right here, but we're meeting in November, right, Dan?
Yes, next week on the 16th.
Yes, November 16th.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. And while I got you there, Susan Manning, Monona Grove Educational Foundation.
Yes. The Monona Grove Education Foundation, and I did post a summary, so I won't go over everything in detail, met November 10th, yesterday at 4 p.m. Superintendent Dan Olson gave a report, and you may just want to review that to see if there's anything that helps to update you. He thanked them for their support on the operational referendum and that the referendum did pass. And he also clarified that the effect on taxes would be in 2021, not 2020. He again reported the 4K2 start date for January 25, 2021. He also updated on the stadium project, which was helpful for me to hear. They're going to be doing replacement of the track and field, and that will start this summer. And that is covered. And Dan, correct me if I didn't get this accurately. That's covered by the building referendum. And then they are starting to fundraise again on additional work. And that fundraising is planned to be starting 11/10/20. And that means because of the building work being done on the track, if there is track in the spring, it will have to be at a different location. Is that correct, Dan?
Yes.
Okay. And then on the communications report, and I had not received this information either, so it was helpful to hear that Ron Neiman has passed. And the committee is continuing to work on communications, particularly the connections, the mailing that goes out to all the alumni from the foundation. Mary Salvi, the treasurer, reported that $20,000 has been received, and this is amazing, for the Ahern Scholarship to be used in matching funds from Forever Friends for senior scholarships. I mean, it's really amazing. So that means, again, they'll match your funds if you make a donation. So that's encouraged. Ray Charismatic funded, and I just did this, so I'll fix that report, funded a $1,000 per year scholarship for seniors. John Russell with the Village of Cottage Grove is working on student scholarship funding, and a $700 donation was made by the golf ball drop fundraiser. Patty Parrott, who does basically help manage the golf ball drop, said it netted a little over $18,000 in funds to be used for the Play It Forward program. And again, Dan, I think you'll probably update us on that as that starts to move forward. That will be designed by the superintendent and district staff and meeting needs of our students. And they talked about a variety of things, whether it's clothes, food, computers. They've got a whole list, and Dan is going to be formulating a plan for that. They also approved a grant for one of our teachers for yoga training to enable the offering of programs for teachers and students, kind of a mindfulness approach. They confirmed renewal of 3 of their board members' memberships, Judy Runk, John Weinberger, and Ed Young, and they re-elected their officers for 2021, Jason McCutcheon, President, Jane Bowie, Vice President, Mary O'Connor, Secretary, and Mary Salvi, Treasurer, and their next meeting is December 8th, 2020. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Susan.
And I just want to mention, because you glossed over Ron Neiman. Ron Neiman was an assistant principal at the high school for a number of years, and also at Winnequa when it was a middle school.
Yes.
When I had the privilege of working with him. So thank you for that. Just wanted to add that.
That's wonderful. Again, kind of like helping to know about Lorraine's dad. I think as a board, those are things it's helpful for us to know about.
Yeah. Okay. All right, thank you. Moving to possible action items. First is date, time, place of annual meeting and budget hearing for 2021.
Okay, this is just a procedural thing you do every year at the annual meeting. The electors did authorize you as a board to select the date, time, and location. This would have been it was on our agenda in the October meeting. If you recall, that one went a little bit long, and so it got postponed to this evening. So the last couple of years, you've been holding the meeting in September, and so you've got the history of the meeting date, but I recommend that we stick with that September date.
Susan Fox.
I move approval of holding the annual meeting at the 2021 annual meeting and budget hearing on Monday, September 13, 2021 at 6 p.m. at the district office.
Second.
Yeah, first and second, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, Susan Fox?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Andrew? Aye. Ayes have it, motion carries. Next is resolution to authorize the city of Monona to nominate Winnequa and Nichols schools to the National Register of Historic Places.
All right, just a quick computer glitch. All of a sudden I got logged out of my board docs here. Okay, so Jared and I were approached a while back from representatives from the city of Monona, specifically Doug Plowman, who was the city planner, and Christy Goforth, one of the alders who happens to be on one of the committees dealing with, I don't know if it's the Landmarks Commission specifically, but okay. And so the city has put forth a proposal to try to include, properties on the National Register of Historic Places. So initially, they just asked for our approval to have Nichols School and Winnequa listed as potential places when they went out for RFP to find a consultant to do this work. And so Jared and I consented to that. There was no commitment on our part. So since then, they have chosen their consultant. It's a team from UW-Milwaukee that's come in. And so their next step now is to formally nominate sites, and buildings in the city. And so Jared and I did get a chance to meet with their team, and specifically as well with their consultant, which I think I have her, Gail Klein from UW-Milwaukee. And, so without question, having any of our buildings listed on the register, of course, it would be a positive thing. The big concern is, okay, are there any drawbacks? And does that perhaps, limit us or provide, make things difficult in the future if we have to do things like remodeling or even, at some point demolishing buildings and so on. And so that was the question that we asked. And so I did add in the admin content, and I apologize, we just got this in writing today if you didn't get a chance to see it ahead of time. But yes, there are, it would provide a little bit of a restriction, but the other thing to keep in mind, Nichols School already is subject to the landmarks ordinance in this, as a Monona landmark. It just would add Winnequa to it. So I think what I came away with, and Jared was part of that as well, is that yes, there would be an additional step for approval for work done to the buildings, but it seemed like it would be, minimal. And but it's certainly something that we want the board to sign off on. It's not something that Jared and I should be making that decision. Likely it'll be, many years down the road, hopefully, before we have to do anything to these buildings again. But for future boards and administration, is something they may need to deal with. So that's kind of the big picture summary.
Peter?
What are the benefits of having these properties listed?
I don't know if this is the right word or not, but I would say kind of the prestige of being listed on the National Register. I don't think there's much more than that.
Especially as a
Okay.
public entity, there isn't any tax breaks, where if it's a private business or private residence, there are some, benefits financially through tax credits and different things like that. But as a private entity, we don't obviously pay property taxes or income taxes. We are exploring and haven't been able to go down there. We're still waiting for additional information, but there is a program that allows us to financially somewhat benefit from it, and the concept of being able to sell the tax credits that would have come along with our buildings. But I don't know what that financially looks like, and obviously I don't foresee that being lots of money flowing our way because of that. But there is that opportunity to explore another option with some.
My understanding was only the old portion of Nichols that was designated, not the entire building. Is that Not true.
That was my impression too, Peter, that it was only part of Nichols.
Mhm.
It was the site, maybe, and not the, I had at one point understood that it was the site and not the building itself, but it would be the front part of the building. The main old Nichols building is the historic part, yeah.
So the
Susan
purpose is,
Monona.
for this purpose, they would nominate the entire building in sites. But for the Monona landmark, it is the older portion of the
Yeah.
facilities or the site, which was part of the conversation a number of years ago when we did replace the front sign.
Right.
Susan Manning.
Yes, my thought is, I think it's great to have this discussion, but I think you can hear from the questions that we asked that there's still information that would be helpful to have. And I think the fact that we just were able to see the administrative contact, which says Monona school buildings are publicly owned, both would be subjective to SHPO renovations or demolition in which public funds are utilized. That would mean, as I understand it, that effectively anything that we wanted to do to those buildings would have to be approved, not only by the, Susan, is that right, the Plan Commission, but also by this group. And if you think about this maybe occurring a year ago, it would have been very difficult if this had held up any of the major important renovations we needed to Winnequa School, specifically including the water issue and the base of that building. So I guess I'd like to wait until the December for board action on this, and then we could send Dan and Jared any of the questions we have about additional information and how this would affect things. Because I know when we were working on Nichols, there were questions that came up that had to be answered in a way different from the Plan Commission. So I just need to I'd like to have more information and send some questions to Dan before we take full action.
And I would agree, and I understand completely, Susan. So one of the questions that we did ask during the process of getting clarification, a lot of the things that have to go for approval is definitely the outside or the exterior portion of it. Some of the examples that you will see across other cities in Wisconsin or across the country is that the historical building gets turned into an apartment complex where they're able to maintain the outside of the building to make that historical site, but the entire interior side of it is gutted out to meet that needs, because maybe it was an old school, and obviously an old school can't be easily converted into an apartment complex. So they able to get, so based on some of the questions that we asked, that obviously there are a few extra steps that we would have to go through for getting approval. But like they said, that most of it is just trying to preserve that look of the historical side of it, but having that flexibility to do things inside. And we did talk a little bit about Winnequa, and based on the feedback that we got, is the projects that we could have done or what we are doing would have been approved, because we're not changing that overall structure or the overall appearance of the older building of Winnequa. But I understand where you're coming from as well.
Well, again, I would add to that piece, just because some of us were kind of around during that time, that one of the major issues was the windows at Nichols and being able to solidify, the heating and that kind of thing based on the outside structure. And not that the end result was great, particularly historically, but at that time, those on the board and administration felt we had to do that to maintain this as a student-centered building. And so one of those questions clearly that would come up was the window work we did at Winnequa School and whether that would affect the outside structure. So again, if there's no hurry on this, I just think it's helpful for us to be able to gather more information and then come forward as a board unified and collaborative in this decision in December.
Peter and then Susan Fox.
You know, someday Winnequa will reach the end of its service life. We don't know when that will happen. And given the way education may change in the next, we don't know what education will look like in 40 or 50 years. And being able to, you know, not being able to have the freedom of action with that building, not that I'm saying that we wouldn't, but it just might not be, it just might be more expensive or unsuitable to preserve the exterior of the building. Now, the school board, we can recognize the historical significance of those buildings and preserve them for as long as we feel it's appropriate. But we have an educational mission first. And I am unwilling to do anything that might impede or tie the hands or just make it less convenient for future school boards to do what's right in terms of our educational mission. I mean, the SHPO review process is not designed to be onerous. It's not designed to stop much, except that if there's public objection, it can drag things out. It can be expensive. It can create problems. And, you know, maybe you get it away, but it does, you know, there's this extra process and steps and hoops that you have to go through. And so I really can't support this. If we think that there's historical values to the buildings that are worth preserving, we are free to do that. And future boards are free to do that as much as they like without this designation. But at the same time, I'm unwilling to support something that might tie the hands of a future board or future board, a board in the future. And not that I think that there's anything particularly architecturally significant about either of these buildings either. They've been around for a while. They're local landmarks and to our city, but we also have an educational mission, and we don't know what that will look like in 40 years or whenever Winnequa reaches the end of its useful lifespan.
Susan Fox.
Well, so yeah, Nichols already is a local landmark, so we already do have to, any external change to Nichols does have to go to the Landmark Commission, and then potentially to the Plan Commission as well. This does add, if it's on the National Register, there's no federal change, but it does add the potential of the state piece, which I don't think applies to Nichols right now, but it would if it were on the National Register, is my understanding. It might, and it says it doesn't even preclude demolition really, but it does make you go through some additional steps. With regard to Winnequa is not currently a Monona landmark, and the Landmark Commission may have the ability to just designate it. I'm not sure how that part works. I have the ordinance right here, which I could send to all of you, and I didn't read through the designation part very carefully.
I didn't mean an official landmark.
Designate it, then we would still have to jump through those local hoops. So in other words, the Historic Register by itself, unless they then also designate it, is my understanding from what I read from Doug's memo, that it doesn't change anything, but if the Monona chooses to make it a local landmark, then that does add. We do have to go through the Plan Commission now with regard to changes. And if you remember when we went on the tour with Findorf of the changes, one of the things they pointed out was the ventilation units on the roof, the HVAC systems that we put on the roof, because the Plan Commission required that those be screened in a manner consistent with the aesthetics of the building. And so it was a little more costly, but then which they said they would kind of do anyway, but clearly that was also, they were held to that by the Plan Commission. So we already have bodies that we have to look at, and this does only refer to external changes, not internal. And I didn't remember, Susan, that the Nichols building was under that at the time they changed all those windows, because to me, changing those original windows in Nichols took away a lot of the historic significance, because it used to have beautiful old wooden windows that they pulled out. And I was assuming it was after that they put in those new little tiny ones, because I don't think they would have approved those. I would have rather they had some clout at that time and not let us do that, is what I'm saying. But anyway, there you go. So I'm not sure what I think about it. I'll just see what other people think. I mean, I'm not opposed to putting it off for a month if that's, I don't know what if they have a time.
Yeah. So actually, there is a time
Everybody
issue.
try to- If we wanted to get more information from the state, I mean, I could easily send you the Monona ordinance. I have it right here in front of me because I downloaded it today to look at it, but yeah. Dan, did you have a sense of when they wanted to know or?
Yeah, so, and I agree, by no means should you vote tonight if you're not ready and you need more information. They've already delayed, they initially were wanting to do it at their previous meeting, so the city council is planning on voting, or it's on their agenda for their meeting next Monday. If we're not ready, we're not ready, but I would say we can't wait till our December meeting. We'll have to call a special meeting then next week
Okay.
to get you the information that you need.
Well, then maybe we should hear, I don't know what some other board members are thinking. I mean, maybe other board members are feeling okay with it or not interested in pursuing it at all, or I don't know.
Peter?
How much would it have cost us to preserve the windows or replace them with wood windows instead of what we did? And both in terms of the upfront costs and the ongoing cost of utilities, and how would that impact our educational mission?
Well, it's already been done now, so it's not an issue. But
I know, but how much, what if it had?
And Winnequa, those have all been done, and those aren't, I would like those not to change also, because I do see a value in natural daylight in schools, and I think we lost a lot of that with Nichols when we made that change. And you can use wood lookalike stuff. It just has to look like, preserve the integrity of the look. I'm not arguing for it one way or the other, so I don't want to prolong this window discussion. I'm just saying there are workarounds. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Sure there are, but how much light you have. I think light in the classroom is great, and our new building has light in the classroom, but that's a decision that should be made through when we're looking at the educational value of making those decisions, not because we're trying to comply with some outside requirements of preserving something that may or may not have significance. The school board could always choose to make those preservation things items, like they could have chosen to put in the wood windows.
Right.
But this body is the right place to make those decisions, not someplace else. And so like I said, I'm reluctant to tie the hands of future school boards.
Eric or Elizabeth, do you have anything?
Oh, I'm good.
Meaning you'd like to think about it for a while, or are not interested in it, or?
Well, I'm interested. I'm interested. That's not like I'm not
No,
interested.
I didn't mean that in a pejorative way. I just meant don't really want to approve doing this, or more inclined to disapprove. I mean, I guess I don't want to put it off if we're leaning toward not really being interested in supporting this at this time. If there is some interest based on getting more information, then it makes sense to delay the decision a little bit, but I don't want to delay it unnecessarily. That's my only point.
I'm impartial to it, really. So.
Yeah. So this is, I'm in the Eric Hartz camp right now. I understand what you're saying, Peter, and I feel like there's a lot of like projection and assumption of like a future problem that is not a current problem. And this seems like maybe that like in the future is not an unsolvable problem. So this seems kind of like a nice thing to do, I guess. That's sort of where I'm at on it. So a soft lean towards yay.
That's kind of what I mean, the city's interested in preserving some of these historic features. And I found the whole list really interesting of what they had suggested, the different kinds of architecture. I mean, I wasn't even aware of all that stuff, but so I guess that's about where I am, where you guys are.
But I get what you're saying, Peter. I mean, I completely understand that this could come back later in a really, really, really bad way.
And we can always preserve whatever features we want. This doesn't stop us from, this doesn't say we have to tear down Winnequa, right? We can always say, this is a lovely building and it suits our needs and we don't want to change an iota. But that's where, this is the place that those decisions should be made, because there's an educational component, and the SHPO review process does not consider the educational needs of a single student.
Well, they to the extent that when we applied, we would be discussing that. The whole idea of historic preservation, because think about the individual homeowners who are going to be asked to be on this register. I mean, they have to make the same decision and go through the same thought process, but and you can.
And they get a tax break.
I believe the landmarks can actually assign that assignment to them even without the owner's permission, but to go on the National Historic Register, they're asking for it. Whether they would actually do that without getting the homeowner's permission remains to be seen. But my point is, the whole reason the Landmarks Commission asked for a review of this ordinance and revised it in 2018, I guess, was because they are interested in preserving some historic features of Monona. So it's a community interest thing. So if you look bigger picture, we would be contributing to the community interest. And you're right, it's not exclusively an educational interest. I have a hard time foreseeing a time when the educational interest, if we had to expand, for example, wouldn't be a valid argument for why we'd need to make a change. I mean, I would hope we would never expand Winnequa because it's got as many kids in it as I'd ever like to see in it. Oops, I just hit a button, but am I still there? You're gone.
And
Sorry,
honestly,
you disappeared from my screen, but I'll get it back. Okay, I got it.
well, and honestly, I think before we would really make this decision and put another factor into changes that we need to make in a building is to have some idea. One of the reasons that it makes it a little easier to say that this is okay is because we've done major renovations, but there are a lot of major renovations we have not completed at Winnequa. And if in fact the middle school for the charter school expands, there may be other things we want to do in that building. They've done major things. And it's one thing at Nichols to have to have a second approval for the outside, but we're talking about the insides of the building.
We're not talking about the inside, it's only the outside.
It's only, absolutely, but as you say, when you're doing ventilation, particularly making changes possibly for the COVID issues, that may affect your roof, your windows, your ventilation system on the outside. I don't have enough information to support this tonight. So we have a couple options. We can say no, or we can say no, bring it back in a year when we've had a chance to really evaluate how, for instance, COVID or other things could affect things that we need to do in those buildings that may have an external effect. I just don't want to not be able to do a COVID prevention method because it affects the outside.
Yeah.
But again, I have no idea how
again, Nichols is already subject to that review. So Nichols doesn't take Nichols out of the equation because it's already subject to that kind of review.
Yeah.
So I mean, so we could do that too. We could split it and say we approve it for Nichols, but not Winnequa. If people are concerned about it, that'd be another thing. Yeah.
Peter?
I had an opportunity last year to review a laboratory at the University of Minnesota, the new geological laboratory that they built inside a building that they renovated and put inside a building that was historically listed and such. They preserved the outside of the building. So they were unable to change the windows they didn't change the windows of the building. And it created condensation issues in the space in front of the windows, which resulted in an extra $1 million in construction costs because they could not change out the windows for better, more modern windows. And that's the kind of unanticipated problem that we're signing future school boards up for. We don't know what these needs are. That's the kind of unanticipated problem we can't predict. None of us can see coming. They couldn't see it coming. And that we're signing up for. If we like these buildings, we can preserve them as long as they want, as we want. And that's what we should do here.
All right, any more further discussion?
Well, I guess it seems like we should make a decision if there is a decision to not make a decision tonight and postpone it. I mean, I guess then we would need to know what is it people want to know more about? Do we want to know more about the state, the SHPO process? What's likely to be regulated? I mean, is that, I guess if we're gonna put it off for a week or whatever, should have some specific questions to research, shouldn't we? I mean, I think, and I don't think a year makes any sense. I mean, it's either a week to get, or to give you some time. I can send you this Monona ordinance. You could read the Monona ordinance and see how that applies. And then we could, I mean, I'd be willing to call the State Historical Society. I called them once on behalf of the Dean House to find out some things. And
Well, and I think it would be helpful to have an idea of and Jared may have some feel for that, about the additional things that they would have done on Winnequa if we had had more money, and whether or not those would have affected the outside structure, and whether or not we have any pending things that might be done to Nichols, and whether or not the COVID-19 virus could also, in addition, affect any changes that we need to do that might be affected by the outside structure. I just don't have enough information to make a good informed decision tonight as a board member in relation to what's good for the kids.
well, then that's what I'm asking, is exactly what you want to know. I mean, or roughly what you want to know, yeah.
Well, it sounds like most of us want to table this till next week to get more information. Jared, Dan, you think that would that be okay?
I mean, absolutely. I think what I would do is if you postpone, then we would ask, Doug Plowman offered to, he'll certainly can be available, but we probably need the consultant to be available to answer your specific questions, about, and unfortunately, and Jared, please correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of this is kind of hypothetical. It's all up to those review boards in the future about what they, so we really don't know what the expectation would be. We know what the process is, but as far as how onerous would that be, it's, the people in charge at that time. So, that's what I would do if we postpone this for future. I think we would ask the consultant and Doug Plowman to join us and answer your questions.
Okay, and then if it just we did the vote and just went no, it would be up to the future board to come back, because this inauguration has come back again, correct?
No, this is the one-time opportunity.
Yeah.
The city of Monona is moving forward with their nomination, so it's either do you want your schools on their list or not? That's the question.
Right. Yeah, it's not gonna be a long drawn out thing. So
Well,
either
this is
yes or no.
well, this is intense.
Yeah, here we are discussing historical monuments when we should be talking about COVID-19 and sending kids back to school. It's a little frustrating.
For me, because I didn't really, I looked at this agenda, I guess, for the first time really yesterday and downloaded this stuff. So for me, I might like more time just to read through it again and really thoroughly understand it, but I still lean toward doing it because I support historic preservation in communities in general as a concept. So unless I think there's a really significant downside, and I do think with a public school, there'd be likelihood of, some flexibility. I mean, they might, a lot of our changes have basically been made, and Winnequa has already, the basic look is still the same though. I think even when they put the vestibule in the front of the building, they didn't change anything about the exterior. So I think that has been pretty much the same. It was interesting to me that they chose Winnequa as something they wanted to preserve, but.
Well, that back door is the back door is very different where you come into administration.
Right, but they're usually more interested with the street side front presentation than
Well, I believe that the vestibule did change that exterior view though.
It did a little bit. Yeah, I can't remember. And but that's already been done. So, and that's not gonna, so some of the.
What I'm saying is,
but it's the things we can't anticipate.
That's exactly right. That's exactly my feeling, particularly with the COVID-19 and
I don't see much
the
relationship.
ventilation issues.
Well,
Those could be significant.
we just did that though, so that's not happening again. So, yeah. Anyway,
I don't know that
so
we
where are
fully.
we?
All right.
Take Elizabeth.
Let Elizabeth speak.
So I would be comfortable voting on this tonight, and I trust the judgment of Susan Manning and Peter Sobel, who have been on this board for a long time and have good sort of just historical knowledge and able to project in the future around board business that I can't.
Mhm.
So that's where I'm at with that.
Okay.
I would be able to vote tonight.
Yeah.
I respect all the board members, so.
Me too.
Thank you,
I
Eric.
like it. So can I have?
That's a good clip for the board. Yeah.
Yeah. So can I have a move for approval?
I'll make a motion to approve it. Let me just pull it up.
Where are we? So, okay, yeah, I'm finding it. So you're recommending approval of a resolution to authorize the city of Monona to nominate Winnequa and Nichols schools to the National Register of Historic Places? Is that you're moving? to
Yeah,
approve the
yeah,
whole thing?
I'm trying to pull it up.
Yeah, that's what I have.
Everything's running slow.
Correct. Move to approve the resolution to authorize the city of Monona to nominate Winnequa and Nichols schools to the National Register of Historic Places.
I'll second it.
All right. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Susan Fox,
Aye.
Susan Manning,
Nay.
Peter Sobel,
Nay.
Elizabeth Cook,
Nay.
Eric Hartz,
Aye.
Andrew McKinney, aye. It's a 3-3.
So it
That means it
Fails.
fails.
it fails.
It fails.
Yeah.
All right. Motion fails. Moving to lease agreement with American Capital Financial Services, Inc.
Hey, Jared, maybe you want to kick it off first, just the details about the lease agreement, and then if there's questions about, we can get into the why piece here.
Sure. So each year we do lease our technology devices through American Capital. Part of the reason that we do that is obviously the cost, the impact of the budget is large. And then the addition to that is we don't own the devices at the end. So it also gives us the ability to refresh our equipment and not have to worry about trying to disregard, discard them. So we've used American Capital for a number of years. And so the lease agreement that's in front of you is for 500 iPads and 500 cases. Now, obviously, we've already approved a lease earlier this year, and the purpose of this lease is obviously to help with virtual learning, which Dan and Lisa will talk a little bit more about. But the total cost, if we were to take all this out of our budget this year, would be $209,000. By leasing it, it's a $52,294. So over the course of 5 years, over the course of 4 years, we'll be paying $209,178. We were able to negotiate a flat fee of $166 for a 4-year lease. So I think it allows us to, just knowing where our enrollment is and looking at our budget and not for sure what next couple of years budget is going to look, it allows us to futuristically plan for this and help our students that are in the virtual learning mode right now.
Okay, and then I'll just briefly talk about the rationale. Why do we need 500 iPads in this time of year? So you might recall that we had discussion previously about that some of the challenges that we were facing with student Chromebooks, some students being disconnected and so on during the Google Meets. And so there's been a lot of troubleshooting and problem solving that has occurred since this time and has solved or greatly improved the issue for a number of our students, but we still have some that continue to see that issue. So the solution is for those students still having difficulties is having a second device, an iPad, which does not have any issues for the synchronous learning and the Google Meets, and that we believe that 500 is sufficient for the number of students that would need an additional device that are still having those significant issues.
Susan Fox.
Now, are these just going to elementary students? Because are we doing any of this with middle school, with the Canvas platform too, or is it all elementary?
No, it's so from grades 3 through 12 are the students that utilize Chromebooks. So that issue is through all those grades.
So the Canvas platform will run on this as well. I guess that was really my question. No, we're not talking just see.
Right. But the device
In
is
other words, they
specifically,
can,
so they'll have 2 devices.
okay.
So the Chromebooks work just fine for most of the work they're doing. It's
I
just
see.
during
Okay.
those
Group
group
meetings.
meetings.
So
Yeah.
some kids would have both, in other words, potentially. Gotcha. Okay, that makes
Yep,
sense.
so some of the conversation that has happened is the iPads would use to stream the meetings or the class lecture. That seems to be what's on some of the Chromebooks, the processing speeds is crashing them. So the students would have their Canvas or their learning management system or whatever the extensions that are being used that day in that class on their Chromebook, and then they would be viewing the class through the iPad. So
Okay, that makes sense. That's great. Yeah.
and then the other part too, that I'm sorry, before Susan, the other part of it is that we also have to refresh iPads over the next couple of years because we have iPads 4K through 2. And so by not knowing what next year will necessarily look like, we do know that there are iPads that will be up for lease next year that we could slide some of these into if we're back full time, or they're not necessarily needed at that 3 through 12 level. So there's definitely places for those devices to go once we get back to what we'll call normal schooling.
That makes sense.
Susan Manning.
I think Jared just answered my question. So Jared, 4K2 right now, we don't have any of those students on Chromebooks, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So we're covering the students with the Chromebooks effectively. That's what we're trying to. Great, thank you.
Okay, can I have move approval of the lease agreement with American Capital Financial Services, Inc. as presented?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second,
Elizabeth Cook got it.
I got in
Susan
there
Manning.
that time.
Yep.
And Susan Manning.
you have to move fast.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, Susan Fox,
Aye.
Susan Manning,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Elizabeth,
Aye.
Eric,
Aye.
Andrew, aye. Ayes have it, motion carries. Next is resolution to approve the amendment to the intergovernmental corporation agreement between Madison Metropolitan School District and Monona Grove School District.
Okay, so this is the second part. I'll go briefly. I think hopefully it's pretty self-explanatory in the written documents, but you might recall we had the waiver last spring. We had the issue with, the compliance with open enrollment laws and the charter school law and so on. So we had the waiver from DBI, but part of that agreement was that we would go back and actually amend our agreement with MMSD to reflect what that you took action on last spring. So that's all this does then.
Susan Manning.
I move approval of a resolution to approve the amendment to the intergovernmental corporation agreement between Madison Metropolitan School District and Monona Grove School District as presented.
Oh, second.
All right. Any
and
further discussion?
I just have one
Yeah, go
question.
ahead.
My understanding when I read this was that the waiver is only for this year and then for continuing students. So my assumption is that means in spring of 2022, we can't, no new Monona Grove students could apply. We'd have to apply for this waiver again. Did I read that correctly?
No,
No,
we're
I
done. So that agreement is done. So the students who are already there get to stay there.
That's all this
But-
does. That's what I thought, but then we're done
Yeah.
after that. I did read it correctly. Okay.
Yeah.
That's too bad. I'm sorry to hear that, but apparently there's nothing we can do about it, so. Okay.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, Susan Fox,
Aye.
Susan Manning,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Elizabeth.
Aye.
Eric,
Aye.
Andrew, aye. Ayes have it, motion carries. Next, let me get this other, computer's running a little slow too. This Monona Grove School District, wow, what is this here? The live streaming of board meetings.
Okay, so so you might recall at the last board meeting, we had a question about whether we should, be recording and live streaming or making available later for special meetings. And so I attached a document that we have, the agreement we have with the city of Monona. And when the last time this was updated, of course, we were, doing all face-to-face, meetings. And we also at that time had 2 regular board meetings per month. So you'll note in there that in the agreement, and those are just estimates, it's not that they had to be, strictly adhered to, that in the agreement, it estimated 26 board meetings a year would be broadcast. And so during that time, then and when we're in person meetings, we actually have students that are hired to come and do the work and actually, run the equipment to record and stream the meetings. Now, obviously what's changed, as you're well aware, is with the virtual meetings, it's a very different process to go ahead and live stream, and actually much easier process to be able to simply take these Zoom meetings and stream them, either record them to broadcast later or to live stream. And the other thing that's changed, of course, is at this point, we're doing 1 regular meeting a month, and then we have more special meetings, obviously, because of that. So I think it's really important as far as to be clear what the expectations are of the board with regard to special meetings. And I think there's a couple ways that you could go about this. I think one would be simply, and first of all, I should also a really important point, to get an opportunity to meet with Will Nimmo to talk about his and his staff's capacity at this point to do this. And he assured us that, yes, that is not a problem while we're doing these Zoom meetings to continue to live stream as many as you would like, because he does not have to be physically here. He just needs to set it up very different than when we're in the boardroom. So during these virtual meetings, that's not at all a problem. When we go back to in-person, it is a little bit more, because then now you're bringing in hiring people. There's a cost associated as well as finding students. So it might be simply a matter of, it could be a suggested motion that you would like all special meetings live streamed while we're doing these virtually. And then you can address it on a more permanent basis once we come back to the in-person, because at that point, we probably really should update the agreement with the city to reflect, our current practices.
Susan Manning and then Peter.
Well, I think there's, again, understanding that there's a difference between the virtual is actually a lot easier, but the fact is in the agreement, the estimate was for 26 meetings when we used to meet twice a month. So in terms of the expectation of the workload on the media group, it would seem that this wouldn't be a problem. I would, however, recommend that you would add to the language of your recommendation. So effectively, I think as a board, we could use 26 as a parameter. If we start going over that, yeah, then maybe the board needs to think twice about having them do that. But generally, except in extreme circumstances, even with the special meeting, we're only meeting once a month. And often we don't have a second meeting in the month. So we aren't even meeting that capacity. But I would recommend that to your recommendation, we add administration recommends updating the current agreement to specify a special board meetings will also be recorded and broadcast as requested. So let's say the board says, this is an update on the building. We don't really need to record this. Or if it's really one of those great work sessions with the principals that the parents would really, again, part of our job is to communicate to the community. And this is one of the main ways we do that. And we have the capacity for 26 versus 12. So first of all, I'm not sure we need to change it. And second of all, if we do, I would just add as requested within that parameter of 26. I think we're making this a lot more difficult than it needs to be.
Susan Fry.
Yeah, I had the same thought, and I appreciate, Dan, you made that point as well about the number of meetings being much less this year in terms of regular meetings. So that we're covered by the 26th of the special, but I also agree with what was just said that I don't see any reason to even change the agreement with the city because we're going to be well within the 26 meetings that are average in that. I would think we might only be talking about this year. If we get to the end of the year, we decide we do want to alter the agreement. If we're back in person and we do want additional special meetings, then that's a conversation we should have maybe at that time. But I also don't think the other issue I had with the way this recommendation was worded is that it should be as requested because yeah, there are some special meetings that we would not have much public interest and we wouldn't want, recorded or wouldn't need recorded. So I guess I was kind of thinking we would just talk about it. And if as a board, we were feeling like we should just be asked every time we schedule a special meeting, okay, now is this one you think needs to be recorded and then record it? I'd be more comfortable with doing that than actually changing the agreement at this point.
Me too. And
Because
look at,
I think even the example you gave, Susan, about those principals presentations, those to me are far more effective when you're there in person. So I always say, I don't even know how valuable some of those would be recorded.
well, and we can
Depends
decide.
on the way they are. So
Yeah.
I don't want to lock us into that potentially, but anyway, that's my comment.
Well, and
I do think that at the time of COVID, it's worth expanding.
well, Andrew, I think it's helpful if they look at, I'd urge the board members to look at the agreement because it talks about 5 home football games, 6 basketball games, 6 girls basketball games, 4 choir concerts. We're not doing that right now.
Right.
So the fact that Dan asked Will if we're overloading them and he said no, what we have to do as a board is decide before the meeting if we want it recorded,
Right.
not after.
Right.
So
Peter and then Eric.
I always think we should err on the side of openness to the public, make this available to the public. Maybe the public isn't interested, but that's not our interested. It's not our call. It's their call to do that. And if we're going to make it optional, we should have as board members, we should actually solicit from the public, say in the posting, if you want this to be available live or recorded somehow, please contact the district office because these meetings are required to be in public for a good reason. That's what we should be doing. I don't know if we have to have them all streamed or recorded live, however, streamed live, because if you're not participating in the meeting like the public is for the most part, watching it, having it recorded and played, be able to go some point and watch it on YouTube, I think would work also fine. Now, I understand our last meeting, the last workshop, we did record it, we did post it on the channel, and I'm curious about if that process was a challenge or if that was relatively straightforward, and if Joyce or Dan can talk to that.
Actually, can I just interrupt? Joyce just sent us a chat that Will is indicating that, speaking of this, that YouTube is giving him an error, and so Joyce is now recording it, and he'll try to continue to get an update. So YouTube is apparently down worldwide, so it's not recording anywhere. Joyce is recording this meeting, so will do that workaround to record, to put this one on YouTube, right, Joyce?
I believe you're live. It's all
We're live
fixed,
now?
but it was
Okay.
down. Yeah.
Oh, did you send that about an hour ago? Yeah, you did, and we didn't notice. Sorry, never mind. I just saw it.
Joyce, is the process we used the last time relatively straightforward, where you could, after the fact, send it to Will and have him post it?
Yes, that's no problem at all.
Okay.
Eric?
I don't know. I guess I'm having a hard time understanding why here's the thing about the special board meetings, which bothers me, that they should all be live streamed, is because our whole method of meeting has changed. Now, if this would be, if we were meeting normally, we would all go down to the district building. It would be a public meeting. The public be able to come for any meeting, whether it's a special board meeting or a regular board meeting, they would be able to be there. And if we go into closed session, we vote to go into closed session, then we follow those rules. But there are plenty of special board meetings like last week, that are not closed session. And so we have a fundamental change in the way that we're holding board meetings. So I do think that the special board meetings should be available and streamed live, as long as we are in the pandemic and we continue to meet online for board meetings. I mean, perhaps maybe in the future, we would want to talk about, when does the board move into in-person meetings? I think that should align with when the school is in person, but that's another discussion. But, as long as we're meeting online and we're significantly limiting, I know the public can go, but it significantly limits, and there are safety concerns too. We should be as transparent as possible and make sure that these are available to the public. And I think that we should provide, and I know we're falling within the numbers, so I don't know what I guess I'm having a harder time understanding why some members of the board wouldn't want to make meetings more available to the public, especially the special board meetings, which seems to be the topic of discussion.
Susan Fox.
Yeah, I think I was thinking of, like, if we had that meeting we were just talking about, that we were going to call a special meeting to vote on the historic designation that might take us 15 minutes. Do we really want Will to set that up? That's what I had in my head when I said that. It's not that I don't want to. So I'm prepared to make a motion that says for the duration of our virtual board meetings that we record all special open meetings for the public.
I would support that.
Okay, is that an okay motion? Do I need to reword that, Joyce? I didn't write it down.
I'm playing with it just a second.
Okay.
I mean,
Peter.
my thought would be that they'd either be live streamed or they'd be recorded and posted. I'm fine with that option, be it recording and posting. I'm fine with that, so long as the public does have access to it somehow.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be live streamed, which may be slightly more complicated, but like that 15-minute meeting that we had,
Right.
record it, pop it up.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be live streamed. It
Okay,
can be
so
after the
I'll
fact.
consider that a motion, but
Either or.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe what we need to do is have a motion, is say that we will record all meetings with
And
the
make them
possibility of
available.
live streaming as appropriately or something. Because clearly there have been some where the administration has automatically said, yeah, when you're discussing reopening, that should be live streamed.
Yeah.
Because that's
You could
obviously
say
gonna have.
either live streamed or recorded and available, to the public at another time or after the meeting.
It's interesting that the statute says the requirements that meeting locations be reasonably accessible to, again, it's the meeting itself, to the public and open to all citizens at all times, means that the government, they must hold their meetings in rooms that are reasonably calculated to be large enough to come. But again, we have to accommodate the accessibility of the citizens. So, as much as I think it's nice to be able to record it and show it, I think for public accessibility, if Will can do it, we should live stream it. Just because of the words of the law.
I don't.
It's supposed to be accessible at the time that it's occurring.
It is accessible though.
It is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't, yeah.
Dan.
Okay, so I guess two things. First of all, this is your 38th meeting this year. So you're well beyond and that's why I chose not to ask Will to record, because he's a one-man show right now.
Right.
Granted, it's easy to do, okay, but we're hiring students and they're paid to do this. Will doesn't get any extra compensation when he does this at night. So I was trying to be respectful of his time. But having said that, if we know in advance, and I also understand that we're not going to have 38 meetings every year. This has been a unique year. So it's not unreasonable to record or live stream every special meeting. I would ask that whatever motion you do, please be crystal clear and do not leave it to my discretion, because clearly I didn't have the same viewpoint as some of you did. So, back to what you talked about with Mike Jelko last week, as a board, please make a decision and then we will follow it.
Well, and again, Dan, I think even though you're talking about the 26 meetings, I'll read you again the fact that we have not had 5 home football games, 6 boys basketball games, 6 girls. I mean, this has been a very strange year.
Mhm.
And I,
But,
I'm on the
but
committee. I
I agree, but
understand.
please
Will
understand,
is
Will
incredible.
Will doesn't work those games. Okay, we hire students to do those games. And so that's my concern is he
He's
is the
doing
one person that's doing this work now.
I did see him doing the city, the plan commission meeting this week, and he was doing it with his 2 kids, just like everybody else's in his house.
Peter.
I mean, yeah, it does impose on his time, even if it, and
There's
there was
no
a glitch,
question.
so, so it's,
Peter?
that's a factor.
Does recording and sending them on that he can post the next day, does that relieve some of your concern, Dan? Rather than live streaming?
Oh, absolutely. That's the easiest, but, and I do want to be clear, and that will confirm that if we want to live stream, we can do that. Okay. Because like I said, I think for the most part, it will be likely 2 meetings a month, what regular one and one special. So I don't mean to imply that we can't do that. I just want to be clear about what we're doing and be consistent. So it makes perfect sense to me that we would live stream every special meeting. It also makes sense to me that in some cases, it might, to record and post it later. But I guess we need some parameters about when we're going to use those options.
That's the hard part.
Yeah.
I got to get over that. We done met 38 times this year.
That is
Hell.
So how about, and I'm not doing this as a formal motion yet, because I'm not sure if this reflects what you're saying, but if we move to record all open special meetings for the duration of virtual board meetings, with the intention of, so that they can be uploaded to YouTube. I mean, they can then all be put up, as you said. So I'm not, just if that's what you want. And then we would specifically request, or administration might recommend, live streaming some. I mean, I don't think it's necessary to live stream all of them.
Right.
But so the motion could be that for the duration of holding virtual board meetings, we record all open special board meetings. And do we want to automatic? I mean, is that something we want? To upload on YouTube, to upload later, with the possibility of some live streaming. Is that?
Rather than for the duration, just any virtual meeting. Who knows? We might like to do this forever.
Well, we've done it 38 times. Jeez.
Yeah. To make it for any virtual meeting, the school board will either arrange live streaming or recording to be available to the public at a later time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, is that a motion?
Well,
Can you
yeah.
read that
I mean,
back?
Okay.
You say that again, Peter?
Oh, Susan, did you get it all down? Or?
well, I moved that for any virtual board meeting, or that any, I guess take out the 4. I move that any virtual board meeting will be recorded and
Yeah.
uploaded. Is that the right term? That's why I'm struggling here.
And
Upload.
the problem you're getting into is the regular board meetings. You're now talking about recording those, and
The
we
regular,
want those live.
I did want to refer to just special, because the regular ones are already being handled the way they're supposed
Perfect.
to be.
Okay,
according to the agreement.
perfect.
So that's
Make
why I
sure
was
that's
saying
there.
special open board
Perfect.
meetings, because obviously we're not going to record closed session either. So,
Great.
Well,
so I would move that
can
all
I suggest?
virtual special open board meetings be recorded and uploaded on YouTube.
Well, we don't have
And
to.
that some special meetings be live streamed upon request, something like that.
Can we just say live stream or recorded for?
Well, what I originally said was recorded or live stream, so we could do it that way, I suppose. I just
Yeah.
didn't know if that was too vague, because then it's back to that, who makes the decision then? I mean, somebody has to make a decision.
Like, for example, when we have the special meeting on school reopening, we're going to want to live stream that one. you know. So I think it should be live stream or recorded for, to make available to the public later. And Dan, when you post a meeting notice to us, you know, just pick one, make a recommendation. And if anybody on the board objects to, or thinks it should be done differently, then they can send you a note.
How
But
about,
you don't have to include all that in the
how
motion.
about this? I move that all virtual special board meetings will be recorded and made available for later public viewing or live streamed upon request by the board.
By whom?
Upon request
By
of the board.
request by whom?
Of the board, upon request of the board,
Or a recommendation by the administration.
or recommendation of administration. So that's my motion. I move that all virtual special board meetings will be recorded and made available for later public viewing or live streamed upon request of the board or recommendation of administration. So it would need a second.
I'll
And
second it.
I'll type that and send it to you,
Okay.
Joyce.
All right, and it's been second. Any further discussion?
Dan, do you have any comment?
Oh, I could type it in the chat.
No, we'll make that work.
Is that?
Is that too cumbersome?
Well, I feel like what he asked us to do is not put at administrator's discretion,
Yeah,
right? And then that's what we did.
Well,
So-
it's only for live stream. It's just, here, I'm typing it in the chat right now. So let me. see.
Yeah, I was under the
Okay.
impression that, Dan, you were asking that we not leave it up to you to make a decision around live stream versus
Yeah.
recorded and posted.
I mean, if you want to do that, like I said, I'll do that and I'll do the best I can to, you know, but there's times, as you know, that I think I know what you want as a board and I'm not always right.
yeah.
Yeah, but if you
Nobody
ask
knows-
us and we
nobody
don't
knows
tell
that,
you, then you
Dan.
can blame us.
Can we just be specific and say that because all the regular board meetings are already recorded and live streamed, so
Mhm.
can we just be specific and say special board meetings will be recorded? And I'm fine with live streaming them, or I'm also okay with recorded and available to the public after the meeting. I'm fine with that too. Either one I'm fine with. Which one would be easier to do, Dan?
Okay, well, I just made a motion, but then I just sent it to Joyce instead of all of you by mistake. So let me send it again. Okay, so
You
now,
say-
and this is the motion I made and that Peter
Okay.
seconded. So we'd either have to vote on it or
All right,
withdraw.
let's see.
I move that all virtual special board meetings will be recorded and made available for later public viewing or live streamed upon request of the board or recommendation of administration. So basically, it says that all special meetings are going to be recorded now and made available to the public. Or if we recommend alternatively that they be live streamed, or the administration recommends they be live streamed, I mean, it's still the same recording process, I guess. But
No, I think that's okay, because then, Dan, if,
that's fair enough, Dan, or I mean, because
yeah,
that isn't making you decide on all
not
of it.
making you decide.
Yeah, that'll work because I'm just thinking, I mean, for most part, it's not that complicated. Like, I think it's pretty clear consensus, like you said, if you had to have a special meeting for one item, you know, most people probably say, yeah, record it and show it later. If there is something that there's a question when you schedule the meeting, you take a vote on it if you want it,
Right.
if there's a question about it.
Yep.
So
Whether you
Dan,
want it live
I just want to clarify that anytime we have a board meeting, special or not, a person could access by coming up to the
Yeah.
district office and watching. Okay, so I think one thing that the board needs to clearly understand is that the law requires that we make this open and accessible by statute to the community.
And we're doing that right now because every committee meeting, they're open, they're always open, they're always at the district office technically with a board.
Unless they're at a coffee shop.
Well, our committee meetings I'm saying when they're virtual, we're all in our houses right now, but technically they are at the district office and there
Right.
is a boardroom with a laptop for people there to use. So that's true of all committee meetings and the board right now. So people do have access to attend. Well, the committee meetings, actually, I don't know. I mean, they're open, but I don't know if we set up a laptop.
I just wanted to validate
We
that.
are following the legal process.
I just wanted to validate that that the accessibility was still being provided at the district office. I mean, that's a lot of work for Joyce. She has to sit there until that's all done, you know, or she can go home.
Okay.
It doesn't say it,
So-
we should work on the way. The intent is that basically we're gonna record all special meetings, and the only ones that'll be live streamed are the ones that we think are particularly important, or that you think as administrators you recommend. Chances are we're gonna agree.
Yeah, I would say the motion as written provides a lot more clarity than what we have right now. So I can work with that. So thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion on this one? Because there's been the first and second, so all in favor, Susan Fox,
Aye.
Susan Manning,
Aye.
Peter Sobel,
Aye.
Elizabeth Cook.
Aye.
Eric Hartz,
Aye.
Andrew McKinney, aye. Ayes have it, motion carries. Moving to discussion items. First is equity in education policy.
Okay, so you might recall that earlier this fall as a board, you approved an equity statement for the district. And that was, a lot of people were involved in creating that, and the Teacher and Learning Equity Committee did the bulk of that work. And we had a lot of discussion about an equity policy, which of course is a much greater and more impact, or a different impact, I should say. And so our policy committee had a discussion about how we might go about creating this equity policy. And it's not a typical policy like we would normally go with our normal procedures. And so the discussion was this was back in September 23rd, that we would have a discussion with the entire board about the process on how comprehensive a policy we might want to have and how to go about creating it. I did give a link to one sample, not to say that our policy should look identical or even close to this, but of what an equity policy could look like. And so not that you have to make any decision tonight, but just an initial discussion, your thoughts about the process of developing this policy. And, so I'll stop there. Our board members that are on the policy committee had a, thoughtful discussion about it. And so I should give you an opportunity to, share your thoughts. As well as the TLE, both committees have spent a lot of time with this.
I think, did everyone have a chance to read through some of this Highline policy? That's by far the most detailed one I've seen. So one of our questions, I think if I remember correctly, Eric, when we talked about this on the TLE committee last year sometime, was whether we wanted all of that. I mean, they have all these different parts and they kind of get into some operational kinds of things. But so part of the question was, what do we want to see in an equity policy? Do we want to see definitions? Like they have some very clear definitions with a vision. I mean, they include their community, their district vision, I think, in it. And as the more we talked about it, it got bigger, and that's where we just weren't sure what to do with it. Because originally, staff had come up with a basic equity policy and brought it to the policy committee, and we weren't sure it really reflected enough. So we just haven't acted on it. So I'm not sure what the thought was, I guess, to just discuss as a board, what kind of policy do we want beyond a statement? And do we want staff to try to come up with a recommendation and then for us to respond? Or do we want, I think there was some thinking from the Alma people that the board should really have some more discussion. I'm not sure, Dan, if that was.
Sure, and thank you, Sue. I'll put a little more context. So if we're going to develop a very broad and specific, or not contradictory, a very broad policy, like the Highline one. I would recommend that we do it in a very similar process of creating a strategic plan where you involve a lot of stakeholders. We have a group, we bring a facilitator in, and we really talk about what does equity mean in Monona Grove School District, and then through that process, what are our written policies that we want to have in place that this is, what we're going to follow to accomplish our end goals. And so I actually, if the board would support that, I would even say that would is what I would recommend, because the other thing is our strategic plan expires. I don't recommend we try to redo that this year during the pandemic. And the other positive thing that if we create an equity policy first, and there's no reason we can't work on that this year, even during the pandemic, that then that policy could drive our next strategic plan and be an integral part of the work that we're going to do more, to meet those goals. So that is a concept. So the question is, do you support that, and how broad do we want to be, or would you prefer to work on it more internally?
Yeah, I definitely would support that, Dan. I think it's, the right thing to do. And as far as, how broad and stuff, or how we'd want to do that, I'm curious to hear what other board members have to say.
I'm also in agreement with that approach. And I happen to like both the wideness and the specificity in the Highline example. And I don't know that we have to be that big, but I think this idea of really breaking it down in all of these really specific operational ways is really helpful, particularly with this topic, right? When things can get a little bit more intense in your discussion around it. And so the more sort of meat we have on the bones and policy, I think the easier it's going to be for our staff to actually execute what this policy is.
And
Susan?
yeah, I like it for the same reasons, and I think I like the idea of it potentially feeding into a bigger strategic plan. So I think that's, and that's what well, as a board, we did have that kind of conversation a little bit when we adopted that statement of why are we adopting the statement? Well, it's to drive policy. And so anyway, I kind of like that idea of making it a bigger project and having a consultant help us work through it.
Yeah, I'm in agreement too. Peter?
It's a process that's going to take a significant amount of introspection. And so it's going to have to be a thorough process and a time-consuming process to get through. So yeah, whatever that. So I would expect that if we're going to go to all that trouble, we're going to do this right, that we come up with a relatively detailed policy that gives good guidance going forward. And we're going to have to, like I said, do a lot of introspection, public introspection, to get it right. And so I think an expansive policy and look at this is the right way to go.
Okay, so yeah, I guess what I would suggest then is that I come back next month with a framework, more detail about the approach, a potential timeline, about how we might go about creating a stakeholder group, some ideas about the facilitator or the type of facilitator that we want, and with the goal of beginning this work perhaps in January. I think, given where we're at, we certainly can start in these virtual type meetings, and it very well could be a year-long process, and hopefully we can wrap it up in a face-to-face, opportunity. But if it's okay, I'd come back next month with some more detail.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Dan.
Okay.
All right, let's move to the next one. School Resource Officer Oversight Committee.
Okay, so if you recall earlier this fall as well, that as our agreement expired, I had requested that you authorize me to enter into a one-year agreement, essentially to kind of, I don't want to say buy time, but to continue on until we have an opportunity to do a thorough evaluation about the long-term plan about, first of all, whether we continue with SROs, and then secondly, if so, what that might look like. Just a quick update as far as that agreement, we still do not have an agreement. The draft that you saw this summer was shared with the city of Monona and Village of Cottage Grove. Just got back this past week, finally, their reaction with, and potential revisions from, their attorneys. A couple of you as well had, sent me your thoughts about that. So we're still in the process of working through that. There's not a rush. We're not having officers in the buildings, while there's no students in the buildings. And so, but more importantly, that would be more of a framework, what it might look like for long term. So I'll keep you updated on that. But again, we don't have an agreement in place at this point. But then that evaluation process, kind of like we just talked about with the equity, I really want your thoughts about the process of going through an evaluation. And it's really kind of a couple ways that we can consider it. One would be that the board actually create an ad hoc committee that's, an arm of the board to do that work and lead that evaluation. Or the other would be that you, direct me or authorize me to do that evaluation. Same thing, keeping you informed along the way, but to kind of put that together. So in this case, I shared a link to an example of the school district of La Crosse, who's going through this process right now, and has quite a bit of detail about the process they're going through in their evaluation of their SRO program. So I'm not saying this is what we should do. That's just an example. But we definitely need to do, that thorough evaluation. And again, obviously our focus has been on, the reopening and so on this fall. But this is something that we can't wait. And so I would say, again, second part of the year, we need to get moving on this evaluation. So I'm interested in your thoughts about the approach, whether to have it kind of a board committee led, or that you kind of direct or hand it to me to create a process for this evaluation.
Oh, go ahead, Susan.
I don't know if I have a clear thought about that yet, but one of the things that I thought seemed helpful with the La Crosse process, and I meant to try to call one of their board members because I was in a summer book study with them this summer with a couple of them, was that they had their board members generate a lot of questions that they wanted answered at first, and then they had several discussions of stakeholders, and it wasn't clear to me how they finally arrived at who all would be. And they ultimately did have assigned to their superintendent to form a committee, but they gave some recommendations for stakeholders, realizing that not all of theirs would be, including some community organizations, not just that should be represented, not just people, but for example, whether you want to include SROs. So kind of like that, of asking the board to think more about what is it we want you to look at when you evaluate, what kinds of questions, do we want to make sure are included in it. I don't know that I feel like, and maybe there, I don't know if it has to be a board directed committee. The title of it, oversight committee, was confusing to me because I think of an oversight committee as if we decide to keep SROs, maybe having an ongoing oversight committee. I thought that's what we were talking about with that term. This is, to me, more of an evaluation decision kind of making committee of, are we going to continue them? It's not really oversight. It's kind of a weird title to me, but anyway, see what else.
Susan Manning.
One of the things, if you look at that first paragraph, I think it's helpful. If we do delegate this to the superintendent, I think it's important that the board members are involved at every level. I think we had a committee that basically did some work that was facilitated by administration that may not have had the depth of information that the board wanted them to have, and may not have actually been moving forward in the way that the board wanted. And then the recommendation comes back from the committee, and it's not really what they don't want to, it's not really supported by the board, and you hate to have all that work done by a committee. So I think it's really important that we think seriously about how we structure this. And maybe we use a different kind of facilitator. I don't know, but I want us to really think about it so we feel good about it as it goes forward. I think it's difficult. I know that the city of Monona is using groups to help them look at review of policies and procedures and things like that. And it may be that we need a little more expertise in this area. A school that's currently not used and not using, and why did you do that? And a school that's continuing to use one, and why did you do that? And I mean, our administrators have already told us they support these individuals in these positions at this time. And I think that's very specific in the recommendation because it talks about the individuals.
Elizabeth?
I'm in agreement with Susan Fox that I think it makes sense for Dan for you to sort of hold and manage this aspect of the process. And then in the event that we keep the SRO, thinking about actually what that accountability and oversight looks like from the board perspective. Like, I feel like that's the right delineation of power here. The recommendation that I would make, and I think, Dan, I shared this with you already, although it's been a while since we've had this conversation, is that looking at the SRO position in a vacuum to me doesn't make sense, particularly because the conversations we've been having is that sort of whether or not the traditional duties of the SRO are appropriate for what they are, right? Kind of within the violations aspects and whatever else, but also these expanded pieces of the SRO sort of engaging with mental health or student connections and some of these other kind of places where we may want to be relying on different professionals or better professionals. It matters in terms of our investigation. And so a recommendation I would have, and also, so that's like this way, sort of horizontally, but then there's the vertical aspect of it, of like how it gets utilized at any particular level, right? When you think about how the SRO interacts at the elementary level versus middle school versus high school, the job function changes as well. And so I think if you're going to have this committee to do this work, I think it behooves us to think about what is our behavioral response across the board, sort of proactively into reaction, right? What do we have? What do we need? And where the SRO may be fit or not fit as a result of that. And then think about kind of job duties and descriptions that are adjacent to that too. Because from my perspective, reading through, having conversations and wherever else, I think the whole thing needs to be reevaluated across the board when we're talking about student behavioral response, and not just specific and narrow to the SRO. I don't think it's going to yield us the results that we need, which is to say, hey, we're seeing significant needs for mental health, student connections, all of these things. We need bodies to do that. Who is the right person for that job? And I don't think you can get to the answer to that question without looking at it from a holistic perspective.
Susan Manning and then Susan Fox.
The other thing that I think is an issue that we have to clearly address as a board is one of the things Elizabeth is saying, and I think that's a really good way to start, is, are the traditional roles appropriate? I think a major factor that has obstructed our ability to do that well is the superintendent was saying, here's what our guidelines were, but they weren't being followed. So it's very difficult to look at the traditional role and the reality of what was occurring, because one of the things that concerned us was not the role, but the way the role was being utilized by administration. So this, I mean, Dan, you're gonna have to be really straightforward and honest about the role and how it was currently being utilized and how you see that in terms of giving us the baseline.
Well, and respectfully, to be clear, I have a problem with both the role and the utilization of the role. So to me, it's
See,
both.
and this conversation that you two just had, the comments you just made, are exactly why I said I thought the board should write down specific questions.
Yep.
Because in both of your comments, you've just raised questions.
That's
and
right.
those kind of questions I have too. So I think it's helpful to, as part of the structure, to say what information do we, like, I don't know how many incidences there were, like how many interactions were there between our SROs in the last year? What kinds were they? Were they all disciplinary? I mean, I'd like to know a lot of that kind of stuff. Those are the questions I would have. And then how you go about setting up a committee to answer those might be, I might be comfortable having you do that if I knew my questions were going to be answered. So and that might be the easiest way to do it. The city is working with Nehemiah on they hired an investigator to investigate that one incident, but then they're working with Nehemiah on a bigger community conversation. And I don't know if that'd be the right group for this, but there are people out there that could help bring focus to it. But I think there are a lot of questions about it. And that's why I said, when I see the word oversight, to me, that's misleading, because it's more of an evaluation. Do we want to continue first? And then, because I thought what we were agreeing when we mentioned oversight, we agree to go forward with an SRO, then we want an accountability oversight committee to make sure that, as Susan just said, it isn't straying from the role is maintaining its parameters, which is getting ahead of us because we don't even know if we're going to keep SROs. That's the first decision we made. So I just think there are a lot of questions that we all need to get answers on.
Peter?
Yeah, I was going to come back to this issue of the city hiring a consultant to review their do a review in the department, and if there is space in there for us to take advantage of that, to work with that as part of this process. I think that again, it's like the equity thing. It's going to require some introspection. We have to not just look at the statistics. We have to look how this is impacting the school environment, and that's something that's hard to get at. And it's hard to get at people's feelings and opinions and thoughts of people who may or may not feel free to speak out, or may not feel like they're being listened to. And perhaps having someone outside, like working with Monona, who's a professional who can spend full time on this for some period of time, helping us to look at this program, perhaps that can help. It's going to be hard. This isn't going to be easy to get it right, because the issues that are raised that we're concerned about are difficult. They're difficult issues in American society, and having some help might help with this. And I'm wondering, Dan, maybe you're aware of what the city is doing, and if you've thought about that at all, or talked to anybody about that possibility.
I'm somewhat aware of what the city is doing. Actually, yeah. And so, if you don't mind, I guess based on what I've heard, tonight, and plus some previous conversations that we've had, I agree. A couple of you have stated it. The first task at hand is as a board, you need to make a decision. Are we going to have SROs in the Monona Grove School District? So in order to make that decision, I think what I'm hearing is, the board needs to be part of that process. You don't want just a report from me at the end of the year saying, here's our recommendation, vote on it. And so I think I would recommend that you actually do create a board committee with the charge of making a recommendation to the full board about the SRO program. And then I would work hand in hand with that committee to get all the questions that need to be answered, but I think it seems to me that the board really needs to be hands-on on this.
Well,
I think that's probably true.
So Dan, one of the problems with the board committee is that there's going to have to be a way to solicit, as Susan said, questions from all the board members. And if we have the committee, we have the chair and 2 board members max on an ad hoc committee. And that's going to limit board involvement. And I don't think we want to do so. So I think we have to be more creative in how we think how to do this. Because I think the board as a group needs to have the opportunity, and as individuals, to provide the questions. And I'm not really sure how to proceed with that. And maybe it is using a facilitator or a group like Nehemiah, and I know Peter actually came in on that and talked on that one, to make sure that all board members have an opportunity to have their questions answered. And in the committee structure, so I can come and watch Teaching, Learn, and Equity, and the last meeting was one of the best meetings I have ever seen, but I can't participate. I can't ask a question. I can't talk to the committee members except after the meeting. I can't interact at all. So that creates a serious difficulty if we're going to solicit questions from all the board members. Otherwise, you're limiting the work to 3 board members. Advisory.
I don't totally agree with that, because I think what La Crosse did, if you read their materials, they had 4 pages of questions that came from their board members that they had
Right,
written down.
but if you make the committee,
I'm just saying, I would start off with asking all of you, just hold on, Susan. I would, well, why not? If we create this ad hoc committee and say, we'd like all board members to submit the questions they feel they need to have answers to before they can make this decision, or and get those submitted to the committee. And then you're correct that as you go along, I mean, you can still watch and you can still send in questions if they're not being answered, but that would give a framework to help the committee say, okay, in order to answer these, what research do we have to do? Who do we have to be involved? I mean, but we've had some input already from the guidance staff on one hand, so I would assume the committee might want to talk with them more. We might even want to bring in the safety officer from Verona, who I heard talk this summer, I thought was really interesting. I mean, you might want to get some different perspectives that you could bring into a committee to help answer those questions. But
if I'm not on that committee, and I haven't been on those committees, I can't ask the questions of that person who comes and speaks to the committee. Like,
you can send them. Oh, that's up. Is that
Eric Hartz had an excellent expert that came and spoke to that committee. As a board member, I couldn't ask any questions. Nobody said you can send them ahead of time.
Right.
I was not involved in that at all. So I really think
how are you suggesting we do this? Because if we give it to Dan, you don't have that either. So I guess I'm not. Are you talking about having a committee of the whole board do this?
I think we should start. I think we should start with a special board workshop that maybe should be facilitated by somebody with experience in this area, so that it doesn't get kind of pushed onto Dan to have to do this. You know, but it has to be somebody that's good with the kind of personalities of the board. I mean, it's like Mike Jelka doing the presentation the other night. He let everybody ask questions, and he did the best he could to answer each and every question. So I would think that's a start point. Then off of that material, if you want to, it's like the questions Elizabeth just asked. I want to know all those. What are the baselines? What are the roles of the SRO? What were the actualities of those roles in terms of they're supposed to be utilized at this point and not utilized at this point, and then you find they're being utilized. I mean,
I actually agree with you, Susan, for a couple of reasons. One, I do think it's important to have all of the board contribute. I know there's a lot of questions I would have. I submitted some of those to you, Dan, but I would definitely like to bring some of those up. And I don't know if that would be possible. One, I don't have the time to be on another committee, so that would put me out. So, but I'm sure, it is important. And Susan, I also, and this is a discussion for another topic, but I think I never understood why board members couldn't, contribute or to committee meetings. I know it's something to do with policy or whatever, that's fine, but it doesn't mean that it's right. I don't agree with it. So, but that's fine. So I agree. I think a special board meeting might be the best way to look at this. Or
at least to start.
Yeah, to start to address this. So.
It isn't so much that board members can't ask questions. It's up to the chair, really. If the chair wants to allow board members who've come to listen, they're not supposed to participate actively in the committee meeting, because that's the whole point of a committee. But if they are interested in attending the meeting, and if they indicate to the chair that they'd like to ask a question at the end or make comments, that's up to the chair. The chair can let them make comments at the end. They're just not supposed to be active participants.
Well,
They're not encouraged to
whatever.
participate.
We're getting off topic.
Yeah.
I think
It is a different topic, but I'm just saying there are ways to get around that concern, is what I'm saying.
I know, but I still think the best way to approach this is a special board meeting.
Elizabeth.
So I agree around full board engagement. And so I don't think a committee makes sense for the reasons that are all cited. I also have a vested interest in this and like beyond stretching capacity, right? Like similar to you, Eric. However, I struggle with the idea of a special board meeting without any like what are parameters there. I feel like we've had multiple conversations around this already. And so when I look at the kind of what lacrosse did, I really like that layout, right? This idea of let's think about sort of what questions we have, what kind of process and investigation Dan and his staff would need to do in order to answer those questions. And then from there, like have some kind of series of special meetings, I guess, if that's what you call them, to gather, ask clarifying questions, go back and iterate. Because I get worried that we're trying to flatten out something that really needs to be a process. Like this is like a systemic issue, right? It's a systems issue that needs to be resolved at the system level by thinking about all the cogs in the system. And so I just get concerned that if it's like, I don't know when it would be, next month or in 2 months, we'll have this special meeting, but like to what end if we haven't put any of the things in motion by which to start really investigating the system in a really meaningful way.
Right. That's part of my concern is we'll be spinning wheels again because we'll spend 2 hours having this same conversation.
Yeah, that's like the much shorter way to say what I just said, Susan, so thank you.
I just think there would have to be some structure to that meeting, with which questions to Dan ahead of time would probably help. Was where I started, was if we could just get down, what is it we feel we need to understand better to make this decision? And sit down and make a list. And if everybody could do that and send it all to Dan by the end of the week, maybe we could even discuss how to best set this up. I don't know. As a starting point, at least. But.
What do you think, Dan?
No, that's not as clear as mine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way to start is with the questions. And I really appreciate, a couple of you mentioned as far as, trying to find time to be on another committee. I get it. I am also worried about the capacity of our staff to do this on our own. Right. The bottom line is you need to make a decision. Are we going to have SROs? So yes, I think we have to start with what do you need to know to make that decision? I think some of you already know what the decision is. So why waste time on doing things that aren't going to be beneficial? Now, having said that, the evaluation is, I think, critical as far as if we are going to continue to help us through that process of, okay, well, what is it that we want them to do? But if we've got a majority of you that have already made up your mind that we're not going to have them, vote, let's move on. I don't think that's the case, but so I think it is really important to get to the key points. So how about if, why don't we start there with the questions? I will send something out to you to solicit responses, and then I'll come back with some sort of an update, next month with kind of a plan to consider.
And Dan can let everyone that has a question or two just send them to you directly.
And give us a deadline for that so that we don't sit on it forever.
Yeah.
Like by Monday or something. I don't know.
Because I don't have any questions. I know what I want. So, but anybody else that has questions should go ahead and forward them to Dan. Peter?
I want to say for the record that I have not made up my mind on this. And and I've heard things on both sides. I've heard some positives and some negatives, and the positives sound good and the negatives give me pause. So I do think that there's more that we have to do before I can make this decision.
That's kind of where I am.
Me too. I want to know more. I wasn't aware that we weren't using them within the guidelines. And who knows how that has affected how things work.
Well, you know, to me, that tells you something too. If you ask staff members,
Yeah.
talk about the value of them and they start talking about how great they are for discipline, okay, that's not the role. I mean, I
agree.
just think you can elicit what, you know, more information than we have, I guess. But I have to think
agree.
about how to frame the questions, but.
All right. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead. Are we done here?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll follow up with a email to you to solicit the questions.
Okay.
That'd be good.
All right, let's go to school renovations, construction update.
So just, I mean, you had a visit not too long ago, the executive summary, a little bit of progress since then. So things are, definitely moving along well with the new school. And then there is a document that EUA put together with regard to the airflows. That question came up while we were touring, and I think, from a couple of you as well about with the airflow, what specifically as it, relates to, COVID. So there's a document that was put together that gives it some specific numbers with regard to that. If you have a lot of detailed questions, let me know and I'll get you in touch back with our architects. But hopefully that will give you a little bit of an idea of that flexibility in the system.
All right, thank you, Dan. Okay, moving to future meeting dates. So we have a policy committee meeting on the 16th, a TLE committee meeting on the 17th, and the next school board meeting is December 9th. So there's no special meetings so far. That's great.
Yeah,
We done
At this
met
point,
we done met 38 times.
that's right.
Okay.
That's
Gee
amazing.
whiz.
So Andrew, do we need to, probably not. It'll probably be January, right? Before we start reviewing the questions on the SRO. I mean, we don't have a time frame for that.
Not yet. Dan is going to give you some time.
I guess, I'm sorry, my intention would be to have it on the December agenda again as at least a checkpoint.
Okay. All right. So in between that time, I just want to say, if I do not see any of you, any of the meetings, happy Thanksgiving. Holy cow. Unbelievable.
Quiet Thanksgiving, I guess.
Oh my goodness. All right.
You guys would you stay well, please?
Yes.
Yes, everybody stay healthy.
All right. Can I have a motion for adjournment?
Oh, motion to adjourn.
Eric can have that one.
Second.
All right. All in favor, Peter,
Aye.
Eric,
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Susan Manning,
Aye.
Susan Fox,
Hi.
Andrew McKinney, aye. Motion carries. We're at adjournment. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Lisa, Hype, and Dan, could you stay on, please?
All right. See you guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye.
Hey, Dan, I'll get back to you tomorrow about the TLE. Thanks.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, thanks, Eric.
Bye-bye.